Thanks everyone for joining us tonight for our webinar. It's titled Exit Strategy and Timeframe for Selling Your Business. My name is Kelsey. I'm with CareStack. I'm here along with Darby and Polaris. We're co-hosting this webinar for you this evening. I'm just going to have Perrin step in and he can take it from here.
Happy to do it. And I would echo both Kelsey and Andrea's comments. This has been a really fun series to do. Hopefully we've got people in the audience who've been with us for all 7 parts of the series. But even if this is the first webinar that you've signed on to out of the series, you can find the prior ones off of our website at www.polarishealthcarepartners.com. And hopefully there's a lot of valuable information in case you missed it there. Tonight, we're going to talk about exit strategies, selling a business. You don't have to build a group practice with the intent of cashing in at some point, though many people do. And I think there are a lot of misperceptions around what that process looks like and some of the parameters around it. So I'm going to give you some things to think about this evening. Once again, thanks to Andrea. Janine couldn't be with us tonight, but CareStack and Darby have been wonderful partners of ours in this whole series, and we're incredibly grateful for their support, not only of the webinar, but for an upcoming conference that we're going to be hosting in Scottsdale about a month away, October 11th through 13th, called Scaling from Clinician to CEO. If you're interested in building a group practice, there will be a ton of valuable content there, and hopefully you can join us in Scottsdale, October 11th through 13th. We'll put the a URL for more information and a landing page in the chat room as well. All disclosures, I'm one of the co-owners of Polaris Healthcare Partners. My name is Perrin DesPortes, and this program is being delivered without any commercial support. All the opinions and information are mine and mine alone. My name is Perrin DesPortes. Like I said, I'm one of the co-founders and a partner here at Polaris. My background is in the dental distribution space. I spent 15 years working for Patterson Dental Supply and ran 3 different businesses for them over that career. And I've been an entrepreneur for about the last 7 years, focused exclusively in the group dental practice space. I was one of 3 operating partners with a company called Tusk Partners that we launched in 2017. And Diwakar Sinha, who is my co-founding partner at Polaris, he and I left that prior venture to launch Polaris in March of 2021. And Polaris is a firm that guides entrepreneurial dentists to both build and ultimately exit successful group practices. So for those who have been on the webinar series up to this point, you all know that a lot of the information we share is highly granular, very detailed, and pretty specific in terms of subject matter. So there's a QR code on the screen right now. If you'd like to scan it with your phone or tablet or laptop or something like that and download a PDF copy of this presentation, feel free to do so. You can follow along with it, refer back to it, and if you've got any questions after the fact, or you can ask them at the end of the webinar for sure, but if you have any questions after the fact, my contact information is at the very end too. So I'll give you a second more for those who'd like to put in first name, last name, email address, or whatever it is, and download a copy of the presentation for tonight. All right, let's get rolling. So, selling a business. It's what a lot of people aspire to do, and they think about building a group practice because they've heard of all the dollars being thrown around. And you know, I like to say that everybody's got a buddy from dental school that seemingly sold a group practice for a nauseating sum of money, and you're sitting there listening to him or her talk about that and think to yourself, you know, that joker wasn't that bright in dental school. If he or she did it, I'm going to do it too. And I like to say that's a terrible reason to build a business to begin with, but it also may set false expectations around exit. There's an old adage in the world of M&A that says, you name the price, I'll determine the structure. And I'm going to unpack what that means over the course of this webinar, but we're going to talk a lot about deal structure and what it could mean to you. So my advice on slide number 1 is not to focus exclusively on the price. The deal structure matters more, and I'm going to show you why that is. Transactions are typically made up of two key components: cash flow and risk. All right. And this is kind of an educational piece to consider here, because anybody who buys your business is going to want to feel extremely confident that the cash flows that are coming out of that business are going to be stable, for one, but ideally that they're going to continue at a greater rate moving forward. They also want to believe that the business you've built doesn't have a lot of inherent risks in it. And when I say risk, I mean more than the norm, all right? And we'll talk a little bit about risk too. But what you find is that if a buyer is not confident in the cash flows that you've historically generated, or if they assess your business to have greater levels of risk with it, it's probably not going to value as highly. There are things you can do to clean up both, and we'll dig into some of that as well. So typically the first question around selling a business is, hey, Perrin, how long is it going to take? I get this question on at least a weekly basis, if not more often than that. And the standard answer is probably somewhere between 5 to 12 months. How long is it going to take? Somewhere between 5 to 12 months. That being said, you should never approach the process with that answer in mind, because I'm going to show you where it takes a lot longer typically, and the way you should consider this from a holistic standpoint. The marketing process to bring a business to market for potential sale, and the due diligence and closing process, when you add those two components together, they typically take, on the short end, 5 to 6 months, on the longer end, 9 to 12 months. And that's a reasonable expectation when you are in market. That being said, there's a lot more to consider. Now, a typical timeline around a marketing process and a due diligence process is what you see in front of you. They're non-disclosure. Once we build a deck and build a book about your business and promote it to the marketplace, they're non-disclosure agreements that are signed by interested parties. They're looking at all the financial and operational data in something called a data room. For those that are really interested, they present what's known as a letter of intent, or LOI, and we negotiate those letters of intent for the qualified buyers until we execute on one of them, meaning we go exclusive with one particular buyer around the parameters of the letter of intent. It's a non-binding legal document. Then we move into a diligence phase where the buyer is looking at all the charts and records in the business, a clinical due diligence phase, all the health of the equipment and technology, that's operational due diligence, and certainly financial due diligence. Do the numbers add up? Does the cash flow add up? And that's usually corroborated by a third-party accounting firm in something called a quality of earnings report. When the asset purchase agreement, or APA, is finalized and agreed upon, we go through a soft closing, and then a hard closing date. There's some level of integration post-sale, and that's completed at some point thereafter. This timeline that you see in front of you is not set in stone by any stretch. It's just a reasonable approximation of what typically happens from the moment the business is proposed to the marketplace, going through a phase of diligence, and then closing. And that's, like I say, reasonable expectations to have. That's reasonable. Before you start the process, there may be potential landmines in your business. You would rather find out about these landmines before you're in market, because once you're in market, they are intensely problematic to fix and correct when there's dollars on the line and a ticking clock. All right, so here are a couple of them that when we sit down with a client, we want to go through some pre-diligence items on our end, talk with you about them, and make sure that your business is clean and really ready to go to market. Do you have associates or people classified as 1099, and they should be W-2? This will kill a deal at the closing line, because no buyer is going to inherit that type of liability and any type of penalties from the Department of Labor and the IRS. Do you have partners in the business, or if you do have valuable associates that produce a high level and they're not valuable and they're not established partners, do we need to think about a retention bonus to retain them after the sale? Do you have leases on any of your practices that are not assignable? That can be a killer, and it can also just drag out interminably the closing process if landlords aren't accustomed to reassigning leases to more qualified buyers. What about the current debt levels you've got on the business? It very well may be that you're carrying a lot of debt, and whatever the cash you clear in the transaction, the debt has to be paid off at that point. You may not end up with enough cash in the bank after debt to really make it worth your while. So we want to run some projections on what we think the business might value at and what that net cash in the bank number looks like to you, and make sure that it's worth your while. Is there a poison pill in the operating agreement? You may have a number of minority partners, and if you've got a 1% partner that doesn't want to vote to go along with the sale, and your operating agreement says it requires a unanimous provision to do so, they can stop it dead in its tracks. So these are things that we want to spend time with before we get into market, and really make sure that we've got them cleaned up so that nothing will inhibit the closing process when there really are dollars on the line for real. That cleanup process could be 3 to 6 months prior to going to market. So when you say, hey, how long is this going to take me? And any sell-side advisor says 5 to 12 months. Well, yeah, that's the marketing and closing process, but you may have some stuff you got to clean up beforehand. So clearly defining your own outcome, and I call this a net walkaway number. When you look at the EBITDA of the business, and in this example, it's $2 million, and a reasonable valuation multiple might be about 7 times. So this is a business that values at about $14 million. It's reasonable to conclude that there's some amount in cash and there's some amount in equity. And if this is a 60-40 split transaction, that means there's 8.4 million cash at closing and another 5.6 that rolls into the parent company. Well, the closing costs, there's going to be some amount in taxes, there's going to be some amount in debt, like I mentioned before, and there's going to be some amount in third-party fees between your sell-side advisor, an accounting firm, and a law firm. And the net proceeds are net of the cash amount at closing. So here is a scenario where you've got a $2 million EBITDA business that values at about $14 million, and you're really putting about 10% of that cash in the bank. Is that what you want to do? Is that worth your while to go through the process? We run basic analysis of this kind of stuff to make sure that it's worth your time and effort, once there are real dollars on the line. Here's a broad overview of valuation ranges. This is kind of a rule of thumb. This is not, Perrin's assessment of the market or ironclad multiples, but it's simply a rule of thumb if you're curious about your current business and what a current level of valuation might be. In our world, a solo practice, an average solo practice, is going to value somewhere between 3 to 5 times EBITDA. If you hit about $1 million in EBITDA in a large footprint solo practice or a small group, that's probably around 6 times on a multiple. You get to 2 million, it's about 7 times. 3 million is roughly 8, and 4 to 5 million plus is 10 times or more. Again, there are a lot of things that influence valuation multiples, and I'm going to show you some of that in a second, but this is just a rough range if you're curious about where your business might value. So let's talk a little bit more about clearly defining your own outcome in terms of that net walkaway number. Here's the example I showed before in terms of $2 million EBITDA business, 7 times multiple, 60-40 transaction, and about 1.4 million cash in the bank. What if that is not? What if that is too little cash in the bank? What if that is not worth your while to sell the business or do it right now? How do we think about that? Well, obviously, if that's not a big enough cash in the bank number on the initial sale, we need to take a second look at what the business is and if there are areas for potential improvement or even reinvestment for greater growth and scale. Polaris, our company, has a consulting side of the business as well as a transactional side. So we look at all of these group practices first and foremost with our consulting lens. Is there a way to improve the business before we go to market that could be advantageous? If not, great, let's go to market. If there is, then there's the question of, is it worth our time, dollars, and effort to possibly to take a little bit more time to create a more valuable business? And in this scenario, if we could drive the EBITDA from 2 million to 3 million, that's worth another turn on valuation. So this just went from a $14 million valuation business to maybe a year down the road, 24 million, because we're able to generate greater levels of EBITDA in the business. Now, it also may mean that we had to make some further investments, take on some more debt, buy some more locations, capital equipment and technology, expand some facilities, things like that. So maybe we take on more debt to generate more EBITDA, but when we do, you can see on still a 60-40 transaction split, this is a business now that all but 2.5 times the amount of cash in the bank, and it's a much more valuable business at the onset. So thinking through where your business is, if there's low-hanging fruit to be captured in terms of EBITDA improvement, or maybe with some reasonable amount of reinvestment in the business and some reasonable amount of time, maybe 6 to 12 months, 9 to 18 months, something like that, it might be worth it for us to take some time and improve the business before we go to market. So again, this is something that would be tacked on to the beginning of the process. Let's talk about what your current role is in the business, because this can be one of the biggest areas of risk. Chances are everybody on this webinar is the founder of his or her business. You're the maybe primary owner or managing partner in a group practice, or you may own the whole thing outright. The question beyond financial returns now pivots to how mission critical are you in the day-to-day performance of the business? Are you working clinically right now? Is it a full-time or a part-time role? Are you only the CEO or chief clinical officer of the business or chief development officer, and you're the one looking to acquire practices? What is not only what your role is now, but what is your desired role after you sell the business? Do you want to stay on? If so, for how long? And what would you like to do for the new company when you stay on? This is important because those that say, well, I've built a great business, I want to sell the business, I'm not going to stay on, I'm just going to wipe my hands of it, and I'm going to ride off into the sunset and go buy an island in the Caribbean. That shifts all of the risk onto the shoulders of the buyer. And that may impact negatively valuation multiples for them to be able to compensate for that risk. So I would tell you that there's probably going to be some work back arrangement that you should plan for. We'll get into that in just a second. And if there is, you need to think about your mindset around control of the business. If you sell the business, almost in every instance, you're going to be selling a majority share to the buyer, and they are going to have control of the business. They're going to call the shots. If you've built a successful business up to this point, and especially if you're the sole owner and founder of that business, you're not used to collaborating probably with anybody when it comes to making decisions. And now somebody else is going to be making decisions on your behalf. How comfortable are you with that? These are things we just want to think about from a psychological impact beyond just a valuation impact. And in that consideration, what I tell people most often is that if yours is a very valuable business, you should probably, I would say, plan on working about 2 to 3 years post-sale. If it's less, great. If it's more, maybe there's a good reason for that. And certainly after your work back obligation is done, they would love to have you stay on board in just about any productive capacity. So it's not like when your work back commitment is satisfied that you have to leave. Quite the contrary. Most often, most of the groups would love for you to stay. So this entire timeline now is starting to take on a lot more shape than just the marketed sales process and diligence piece to sell the business. There's some cleanup and improvement of the business usually on the front end. There's certainly the sale process, and then there's the working post-sale component of it. So, like I say, when we think about the diligence phase of a business, there's clinical diligence, there's operational diligence, and there's financial due diligence. And financial due diligence is really the buyer affirming that the cash flows stack up the way they've been represented. And they're typically going to ask a third-party accounting firm to do something called a quality of earnings report, or maybe something called a proof of cash report. But if your business is valued at $500,000 to $1 million in EBITDA or more, this is absolutely something that the buy side is going to insist upon, because they want to have third-party validation that the EBITDA volumes are what they've been represented to be, and that there's nothing funny going on in the numbers. That being said, in almost every quality of earnings report, the third-party accounting firm uncovers something that is, I'll just say, debatable, meaning that it might be accurate, it might not. There could be a point to contest around EBITDA volumes, and that can mean a lot in terms of valuation. For our clients, we are one of the few sell-side advisory firms that insists upon something called a sell-side quality of earnings report. Once again, it's a third-party accounting firm that's going to perform this assessment of your business, but we would rather do it prior to going to market, and we would rather that you pay for it versus a buyer paying for it. So why is that? And why is this important? Well, if a third-party accounting firm corroborates our assessment, our calculations of the EBITDA of the business, then we're pretty confident in our valuation assessment, and we can negotiate the transaction structure and the sale price more effectively. On the other hand, if the third-party accounting firm turns over something that's debatable, that we have to go back and take a look at, we would rather know about that before we get in the market. We would rather have that conversation with you, our client, to determine, is that really going to be impactful, or is that something we think could be negotiated with a buyer? Put another way, I'd rather get all the bad news out of the way up front before there are any dollars on the table. All too often, if you have a sell-side quality of earnings report with a quality third-party accounting firm, the buy side may not even insist upon going through the process for a quality of earnings report that they're going to fund. They may compensate you for the dollars that you spend on yours, and that can be a very healthy thing. It also sends a very strong signal to the buy side that we're serious about this. So here's some risk factors in the business that you might want to think about. I said every transaction has two components: cash flow and risk. And those two, when taken in context of everything together, are what yield the potential sale price and the valuation multiple. Risk factors in a transaction, there are a lot of them, but here are the ones we see most often. Payer risk. Is this a fee-for-service business? Fee-for-service businesses are great. They value really highly, typically less manpower to run them, but they are doggone difficult to scale. So that may value very highly, but the risk may be, how do we double the size of the business after the transaction? That could be challenging. Is it traditional PPO and insurance based businesses? Does it have any Medicaid exposure? There are a lot of buyers that will not buy a business with any Medicaid, and some that are willing to insist upon some percentage, like 5 to 10% or less, in terms of the entire payer mix. So on the other hand, there are businesses that are based around Medicaid, and as long as they have systems and processes around scheduling, collections, Medicaid compliance, and all that, those businesses can value really, really highly. But it's more of a unique buyer if yours is more dependent upon Medicaid. Procedure risk. Are there what we call exotic procedures, or things that are highly technique sensitive, that are somewhat unique? And is that a type of procedure that the buyer can replicate without as much risk in terms of new associates being able to learn how to do those procedures and perform them to a high degree of proficiency? Provider risk. Man, we all love super dentists that can do every type of procedure under the sun to a high degree of proficiency, or those that have like just really fast hands, or high case acceptance rate, those that can just produce large volumes of high value treatment on an hourly basis. On the other hand, what happens if you get hit by a bus or struck by lightning? Super GPs and super dentists are really tough to replicate. I mean, they're strong producers, obviously, but it's not the norm. And that can be a bit of a risk factor as the buy side might assess it. Is yours a business that is more of a unicorn business or some type of a truly specialty, multi-specialty type of a model? If so, that may be fine, but do you have proof of concept? Is all of that repeatable, and is it scalable? If the buy side determines that it's not, then it's probably not going to value as highly. On the other hand, if you have shown proof of concept and shown that it is scalable in multiple locations, they may pay very highly for that. Specialists, more than 50% of our clients at Polaris are some type of a specialty business. Pure play orthodontics or pedo ortho, oral surgery, endodontics, a lot of periodontists as of late. Specialists are wonderful businesses and they are usually very, very profitable. But is your specialty business marketed as direct to consumer, or do you generate most of your new patient flow, your referrals, from a core group of general dentists? And what would happen if any of those general dentistry practices were acquired by an industry strategic? Would those referrals go away? So is there a referral concentration risk, or is yours a specialty business that's based off of a direct-to-consumer marketing model? Clinical comp rates, every now and again we get somebody that wants to sell their business, they want to stay on in a clinical capacity, and they want to pay 5 points higher on a clinical compensation rate. Some buyers will allow for that, but just remember that the more your clinical compensation rate is, the lower the EBITDA is. Those two are inversely related. So something we want to think about before we start making any changes to clinical compensation rates around deal structure. And certainly interest rates that we've all read about and seen in the last 6 months, and the high upturn in those does have some impact on valuation multiples, because all of these group practices, all of these group buyers that are private equity backed, are using bank funds to make their investment dollar go further. So here's the adage on deal structure in and of itself. If you want more cash up front, that generally means a lower valuation multiple. Not much, but a little bit. On the other hand, if you are looking to roll more equity into the parent company, that generally means a slightly higher valuation multiple, simply because the buyer doesn't have to come out of pocket with as much cash to get the deal done. So deal structure can impact valuation multiples. And it's important for you to think about how much you want in cash and how much you want in equity before you go to market. So there are two types of buyers typically in our world. One is what we call a financial buyer. This is a pure play private equity group, a family fund, or something along those lines, that's looking to make an initial investment into the world of dentistry. They're looking for a minimum volume of EBITDA to justify all the closing and transaction costs, especially the legal side of it. And they're probably looking for a business that not only has some minimal amount of EBITDA to justify it, but also has the characteristics of what we call a platform. This is professional management team. It's a back-end operational DSO. It's got all the legal structures to support it. It's got proof of concept. Really, this platform is just lacking high octane gas for growth. And this is going to be the initial investment in the world of dentistry for that private equity group. On the other hand, what we see more often, arguably, are strategic buyers. These are DSOs, usually private equity-backed DSOs, that are already in the local marketplace, and they're looking to make acquisitions that would be accretive to market share. They're looking to expand their footprint. Maybe they are looking to bring on some type of a specialty platform to complement their general dentistry platform. But these are all the name brands we know and love in terms of enterprise level groups with a track record of performance. So I said earlier on when we started out, there's an old adage in the world of M&A that says, you name the price and I'll determine the structure. And I said we'd come back to that, and here's where we're about to do so. So let's take a look at some just hypothetical examples in terms of how deal structure impacts multiples and some ways to think about this as it relates to potentially a process for yourself. So when we talk about deal structure, we talk about some amount in cash and some amount in equity predominantly. I'll tell you, the equity role into a parent company is incredibly complicated. There's a lot to it. All buyers are slightly different. And frankly, this is where a firm such as Polaris earns its pay in terms of how all that's negotiated. You really should plan for all buyers to be unique in most ways. And it's also important to be able to project your equity role into the parent company in terms of the internal rates of return, the hold periods before that equity releases, and the buyer's prior track record of performance. Like I say, there's a lot to it. It can be highly advantageous in terms of an equity role, but it is very, very complicated. So we've got your business on both sides, right and left here, that is a $3 million EBITDA business. The transaction structure on the left-hand side is indicating a 7.75 times valuation multiple, and you can see that that valuation is a little bit over 23 million. And the valuation on the right-hand side, the offer on the right-hand side for your $3 million EBITDA business, is about at an 8.25 valuation multiple, or almost 25 million in valuation. The reason for the discrepancy is that the transaction, the buyer on the left-hand side is proposing an 80-20 cash to equity split. So if you are wanting 80% cash up front and 20% in terms of an equity roll, it's reasonable to conclude that that might result in a slightly lower valuation multiple. Whereas if you're looking for more of a 60-40 split, 60% in cash and 40% in equity, that might result in a slightly higher valuation multiple. So why is that relevant, and what does it necessarily mean? Well, the net proceeds on the left-hand side, taken from the cash at close, some level of taxes, some level of debt, some amount of third-party fees, about $6.5 million cash deposit. Obviously, the transaction on the right-hand side has less cash up front. There's more in an equity roll, and as you would well imagine, there's less cash deposit into the bank. So why would we do that? Well, just like we buy stocks on the New York Stock Exchange or NASDAQ stocks, some stocks are riskier than others. Some have greater upside than others. And as investors, we buy different companies at different share prices for different reasons. We hope they all go up, but some, are riskier. They could be a boom or a bust type scenario. This is really no different. We don't see a lot of businesses bust, but we see some that are earlier stage ventures return more to their equity holders than those that are late stage ventures. So let's bounce back to the structure on the left-hand side. And for that minimal equity roll of 20%, it very well might be that the hold period before recap for the parent company is only about 2 years, and it returns about 2 times your equity roll. That is doubling your money. That's a pretty advantageous return in a fairly short period of time, and certainly is reasonable in the marketplace. Whereas the one on the right-hand side, where you rolled more in equity, 40%, could be an earlier stage venture with a slightly longer time frame of a hold period, 4 years, but it also may return a full turn more, 3 times your equity roll in terms of internal rate of return there. So this is all the stuff that we have to vet, if you will, or corroborate in terms of who the buyers are, where they are in their phase of growth, what their internal projections are, what their track record of performance is. And if you want to roll more equity into a parent company that's at an earlier stage, we want to make sure that the buyer you're hitching your wagon to is one that's going to return a higher rate of return for you and your partners in it. When we look at the total value of not just the cash at close and the deposit into your bank, but the second sale, meaning the equity roll before it releases, and we total them up for total proceeds, the one on the left has less risk because you got more cash up front, you had a lesser hold time, and the return was slightly less, but still a really nice total payout of the transaction. The one on the right carried more risk and a longer hold time with it, but obviously the total proceeds, when you take into account that second sale of the business, are much, much greater. Greater risk as well and a longer time frame. So we want to understand from our clients what your interest is, what your desire is to work back post-sale, what your risk tolerance is, and really what you want to get out of the deal structure and what you're looking for in a partner in this context in terms of the buyer itself. Obviously, these two deal structures are significantly different. One might be more appropriate with one type of a seller and the other might be for another. And as you would well imagine, that adds a little bit more onto the tail end of the total time frame in terms of how that equity releases on the second bite of the apple. It could be a more extended period of time. So I opened up by saying the question I get most often is, hey, Perrin, how long is it going to take me to sell my business? And I said the answer to that is somewhere between 5 to 12 months. Plan on a year, it's probably less, but that's a reasonable expectation. As short as 5 to 6 months, as long as 9 to 12 months. That's if your business is perfect and all you want is 100% in cash. I don't know very many businesses that are perfect. And those that are looking to roll more in equity and have some level of second sale, the outcome is probably going to be longer, and there could be some amount of time before you go to market, plus the amount of time in market, plus the amount of time working post-sale. This can add, substantial amount to the front end and substantial amount to the back end. And this is something that can really impact the way that you think about the total process of going to market and selling the business. And I lay this out in front of you because it could be as long as 7 to 8 years when all is said and done. Likely less, but it could be that amount for a maximum level of return. And I think it is prudent to think about this from kind of a 3-phase process. 1 is improving the business, cleaning it up prior to going to market. 2 is being in market and actually transacting the business. And 3 is any post-sale work commitment or second bite of the apple. All of that added together could be, somewhere on the short end 4 years, somewhere on the long end 8 years. But it's much more of a comprehensive timeline and a more holistic way to approach the potential sale process. So here's some key takeaways for you. I also get asked the question, hey, Perrin, do you think I should consider building a group practice? And that's what this entire webinar series has been about. And even though we're in the business of working with group practices on either the building side of one or the exit side of one, I don't think it's the right risk for everybody. If you're 5 years or less from retirement, I don't think it's worth it for you to take on a ton of debt to do it. I don't think the risk is worth the reward, probably. But if you're 10 plus years from retirement, you got a long way to go, or you're somewhere around mid-career, then I think you probably have to consider it, if for no reason than the fact that it's a defensive play. If yours is a successful solo practice and that practice is really based around you and it cash flows really wonderfully, there are a lot of competitive pressures in the marketplace. It's getting hard to run a small business of any sort. We've got rising costs, and for those that aren't full fee for service, they're declining insurance reimbursement rates. And sometimes it's prudent to simply say, I'm going to have a multi-location group that has multiple revenue streams and multiple locations. I might like to own all of it for cash flow purposes. And this is one that I don't want to be based around my clinical skill set only. So I think it's prudent to consider that. In terms of key takeaways for an exit process, really think structure over price. People who get wrapped around the axle on price are really missing the boat. And you owe it to your sell-side advisor to work with them to work through what you want in terms of structure. Know what you want personally, and maybe more importantly, what you don't want in terms of a partner, a buyer, life after liquidity, what your role to be, all of that. And be objective about the buyer's risks related to the future cash flows of your business. And if you have some objectivity around that and you can clean up some of it, you can probably command a little bit better structure, or at least a better valuation multiple. On the other hand, if they're inheriting and taking on all the risks, the price is probably going to reflect all of that. So the first step to getting somewhere is simply to decide that you're not going to stay where you are. This is a great quote from JP Morgan. And whether you're interested in possibly going to market now or possibly building a group practice now, the decision's really on your shoulders. And like I said, this is a 7-part webinar series where we've dug into a lot of different facets of building and exiting a group practice. And I hope you've found enough valuable content therein to really give you the confidence to potentially start that journey on your own. Those that came for CE on this, the verification code is my first name, Perrin 2023. The P in Perrin is capitalized. So I will let you all take down that code for just a couple more seconds. And then we can start to take some Q&A through some of the chat if there is, or I'm sorry, through the Q&A panel if there is any. If you'd like to learn more about building group practices, we have a lot of free educational resources to share. We have a podcast that's really popular called Group Practice Accelerator. You can find it on all the podcast outlets, including our website for the latest editions of it. We drop about an episode or two every week. And we also have a news feed that we drop every month that you can subscribe to off of our website. Obviously, we do a lot of webinars, a lot of YouTube videos, and if you have some specific questions, I'd encourage you to book a call with me or any of our advisors. If you're looking to learn more about what we do, we have equity partnerships, growth capital solutions, consulting for growth strategy, and obviously sell-side advisory. And if you don't know what you don't know and you're curious about building a group practice yourself, our Discovery Day sessions are one-on-one with clients, and they're a great alternative where you can really dig deep into the business that you have and get the questions answered that you know that are top of mind, but also probably uncover some questions that you hadn't thought to ask yet. We get a lot of accolades on our Discovery Days, and they're a really useful option for those considering building group practices. If you like this kind of subject matter and you're looking for a classroom type of a session with Darby and CareStack and the Dental Success Institute of Mark Costas, we're hosting a conference, 3 weeks from now, I guess, in Scottsdale, October 11th through 13th, called Scaling from Clinician to CEO. A lot of the information we shared over this 7-part series, we're going to be digging into at a much deeper level. And we will have some industry experts to share further details around the subject matter we started to share in this. So you can scan that QR code on the lower left there. If you'd like to register, there are still seats available. We're going to probably cap it at about 100 people, and we expect the seminar to sell out. So hopefully you can join us in Scottsdale, October 11th through 13th. So Kelsey, I'm going to take a pause here and see if there are any questions that rolled in. I'll put the QR code for download for those that weren't able to get it at the opening, if you'd like to download a copy of this presentation, or if you want to book a call with me, if you got any other questions, you can scan the QR code on the right there. Kelsey,
Awesome.
Do we have any questions out there?
I didn't receive any questions. It's been a little bit since you wrapped up. So do you want to hold on for another minute, or do you want to wrap up a little bit early? What are your thoughts?
If there are no questions as of yet, why don't we go ahead and wrap up a little bit early tonight. I'll put my contact information on the screen there that you can email. People can email me directly with questions, or like I say, you can book a call with me directly off of our website for those that don't want to volunteer something for the group. And we can send out any follow-up information to the attendees for those that did actually have any questions as well.
Sounds great. Well, thank you for your time and your presentation. Really appreciate it. If anyone needs anything, Perrin's contact information is on the screen, and I put the CE code again in the chat for you. So I guess with that, have a great night, and I guess talk soon, right? We'll
Excellent.
see you in a couple weeks, right,
You
Perrin?
bet. Yep. Looking forward to it. Thank you, everybody, for being on tonight. Have a great evening.
You too. Bye-bye.